Hey, everybody, this is Joe Turner with the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, and we're going to jump into part one of my interview series with Sam Toles, the founder of Civi Social. He is a social media guru, having worked for Bleacher Report, MGM, and some other big names. And we're going to talk about social media and how cities should be using social media to communicate their message. He believes that most communities are using social media incorrectly. And so we're going to have a fascinating conversation over part one and part two the next 2 weeks. Now, I recorded this interview a few weeks ago, and since that recording, I've talked to Sam about putting together a promotional offer for my listeners. So I want you to stay tuned for episode 2 next week. If you are interested in learning more about this promotional offering, check out that episode because we're going to have a special deal for listeners of the City Manager Unfiltered podcast. All right? Without any further ado, here is part one of my interview with Sam Toles. All right. I'm Joe Turner, and this is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America, racking up over 200 ratings and reviews on the Apple Podcast platform, over 60 ratings on Spotify in its first year of existence. Very excited about the progress of the podcast, and thank you for your support for listening. I've been getting feedback over the last 18 months on LinkedIn and the podcast from folks who want to talk about social media and the impact social media is having on the profession and local government in general. And so I have a very interesting guest that is atypical for this program. Usually I have on city managers and other sort of public sector employees. I have with me today a social media expert with some big time experience in big media market, the entertainment industry. His name's Sam Toles. He is the founder and CEO of Civi Social. He's also a former elected official, so he's got a very diverse range of experiences and background. And Sam, why don't you welcome yourself to the program, introduce yourself to the audience, and give us a little idea of what you're all about.
Yeah, Joe, I'm really, really thrilled to be here. And I'd like to start off by saying that I think city managers have the hardest job on the planet. I always think about this because as a former council member who hired two city managers, and our council was pretty chaotic, let's put it that way. We can get into that if you'd like. And I've worked in the private sector as well, alongside, people like Barry Diller and Mark Burnett, like the highest of the high CEOs in my world. But I think of a city manager as a CEO whose board changes every 2 years, whose shareholders are all activists, whose pay is a fraction of the equivalent of what
That's
the
right.
private sector makes,
That's right.
and has to deal with the insatiably aggressive keyboard warriors on social media every single day that make this a problem. And so I left city government, left my council seat in 2014 when Vimeo, the platform, video platform, hired me to be their general manager. And so I ran Vimeo, was then hired by MGM Studios to be their head of digital and new platforms. From there, I went on to Bleacher Report, which is the largest sports social media platform on the planet, as their chief content officer, overseeing the growth of that platform from 30 million followers to over 108 million followers in less than 2 years, and a billion average views of content every single month. It's been a wild journey. Most recently, I've been working with a few members of Mr. Beast's crew on launching a new YouTube channel. So I've immersed myself in social media over the last 10 years. But I'll tell you what, my heart has been with local government. It's why I ran for elective office. I kept in touch with my city managers. And so I just felt this calling, like this deep spiritual need to take the talent and the skill that I've developed over these last 10 years and give something back to not large cities like Los Angeles, Miami, New York. They have the resources, they have the ability to, hire an agency, even though we'll talk about why that is an absolutely stupid thing to do, but they can do it because they can.
Well, it's funny though, Sam, because some of these organizations with the most resources can be pretty wasteful with them, right? Because they don't have they have the luxury of spending it kind of irresponsibly, right?
It's like the media business, except it's large government, right? But but I think about the budget sessions and the planning sessions that I had with our city manager when I was on the council, and I was elected in 2010 in California, and it was a devastating crisis. We lost our redevelopment funds. The state was clawing back money from cities. I had to, make really hard decisions along with our city manager on which cops and firefighters we could keep on the streets.
Yeah, those are some dark days in California back then. Yeah.
Really, really tough. And so my heart has been with small to medium sized cities and counties for a very long time. And it's the place where I think government has the opportunity to really connect with citizenry who feels disconnected at all levels from government. It's this impersonal, soulless being. And the people in Washington and the chaos we see in Washington is just sort of naturally carried down, and social media as a facilitator of that negative impression. And so I stepped back from my lucrative career in media and built Civi Social to really help city managers and small to medium size, counties and cities take some of the lessons I've learned over the years and turn social media into a power of good or a tool for good, as opposed to a constant agitation, a problem that they're, playing whack-a-mole with.
Right, right, right. I got a question for you, Sam. This is I'm gonna share something with the audience here. You have not paid me to be on this program. We've never discussed any compensation. The reason why I bring that up is because you're one of the first vendors I've kind of had on this program, and you and I have not even really talked about. I don't even know exactly what your company does because you've
Yeah,
never pitched me as far as trying to
that's
market
true.
your business.
That's
And
true.
and what happened is you start talking about social media and explaining some of your perspectives and viewpoints and opinions on it. And I said, that's really interesting. And so we had a lengthy pre-interview phone call where you shared your backstory and we just riffed right on social media and how it's impacting local government, but I don't even to this day even know what CV Social does, right? And you haven't paid me to be on this program. There's
Nope.
no quid pro quo. There's been nothing like that. And so why don't we just like quickly and briefly, because I don't want to be a sales pitch per se, but why
Yeah,
don't you
yeah.
quickly and briefly tell, because I don't even know what you do, and I sound kind of maybe foolish for saying that, but I want people to know like this is just an authentic connection that you and I made through LinkedIn, and I was really enamored with your story and your experience and your perspectives. I think it's going to be very valuable to those listening. So why don't you just briefly unpack what it is that you do at CV Social?
Yeah. So we are, the thing that's crazy about this is as I was contemplating doing this business, I was shocked that there is really nothing like this in the market. From what I can gather and doing my research, basically all cities have to fend for themselves. They're dealing with local vendors, local marketing vendors who want to sell them long-term contracts to basically handle social media for them. Or you have the big, McKinsey firms and other consulting firms who, are versed in social media but really don't get it sort of at the organic level and are ridiculously unaffordable. So what we are is basically a one part consulting, one part training. What makes us special is I refuse to do long-term consultancy for anybody. So, and I also appreciate that city managers have very little resource to invest, because otherwise we're taking money away from cops and firefighters and parks workers. So I built it as a essentially 8-day program where I go hands-on into the city and I do this sort of 3-step process: organize, optimize, operationalize. It's based on exactly how I structured my team at Bleacher Report. And what we do is we build a strategic plan for social media. So we deliver to the communications manager or the people who are responsible for the city's communications basically a roadmap: what platforms, what optimal posting times, what types of content you want to post, frequency, etc. I also give them a ton of tools. So there's incredible advances with AI that makes this work much more efficient. And so communications managers who are, working on press releases and outreach to traditional media and sometimes events can use these tools to, be more impactful on social media. And most importantly, and the thing that I think is the sort of core value proposition to this program is I do a full staff survey. I look at every member of the city's staff. I identify a core team. Usually that's somewhere between 10 and 25 people that are firefighters or parks workers. Or what's crazy is code compliance in the cities I've worked with has the
It's
most
huge.
unbelievable personalities. That's where I'm
Yes.
getting like the
It
big.
takes a special breed. It takes a special
Oh,
breed,
but
Sam.
they're phenomenal. They're
I know.
phenomenal.
They have to deal with so much.
They're incredible and their stories are incredible. And so I basically identify these folks. I meet with them one-on-one. evaluate whether they're capable and interested in doing this. And then we grab those people, put them in a room for several training sessions where I basically teach them the fundamentals of social media, help them workshop stories, begin to get their minds sort of kicking around on like how to tell this city, this community's story in that lens. And then I leave and go to the next city. And so it's really that simple. It's again designed to be super affordable. Any small to medium sized city can do this program, and it's not time consuming. I don't take all of the staff, and we do
Right,
it. We
right.
do it. We do it very
Kind
efficiently.
of like
So
a boot camp. You want
like
to do like a
yeah,
boot camp
but
and teach them how to fish, right? So yeah, you're gonna show them and then teach them and then let them go fish. You're not gonna do it for them.
I'll be a little politically incorrect. It's like a fat farm. You know, your social media is like having a lot of excess weight and you need to shed it off. And so you get to the fat farm, you lose that weight and you become in fighting shape and you go take on those keyboard warriors and connect with your community in a much more positive way.
Awesome, awesome. So the thrust of this whole interview is built on this notion that most communities, the overwhelming vast majority from your perspective, are doing social media incorrectly, right?
Yes, 100%.
And why is that? Why don't we start unpacking that? What is it that they're doing wrong and why?
Absolutely. And what's interesting, and as I mentioned, I do survey work with all of the city staffs in every engagement I do. And the crazy thing is that 70 to 80% of the staff members themselves feel that their communications, not just social, but their overall communications, their work is unseen, unheard. And it's something that they see as a real demotivator because,
They
they
put the
want,
work into
they
it, but
put the
nothing
work in.
happens, right?
That's
Yeah.
correct. The impression of the work that they're doing is minimized or negative or created, or there's negativity created around it. So I think that the core of this is all of the training around social media is through the lens of communications. So it's the same sort of infrastructure or structure as how you talk to the local gatekeepers, whether it's your television station, your radio station, your local newspaper, your local free rag. Like communications is about policy, it's about messaging. We have events such and such on so and so a date, getting that information out there. And
Sounds like code for boring.
it's extremely boring. And right. And like social media, the clue as to why they're doing it wrong is in the name. It's social, which means people on social media actually, I mean, remember when Facebook launched, and we're both old enough to remember this, like they deliberately use the term friends, right? You're connecting with friends. It was
Right.
not you're connecting with information seekers. You're connecting with friends. You're creating a social connection. And as social media has evolved, it is really created a dynamic of parasocial relationships. So when we think about these influencers, from Mr. Beast to the beauty influencers to all of those TikTok dancers, or even the Savannah Bananas, like everybody feels a almost personal connection to the person on the other side of the screen. We carry our phones around with us. We are closer to our phones than we are to our own family members. They are with us all of the time. And so we're checking in on friends that we follow and that we engage with on social media. So that natural social, parasocial relationship is fundamental to understanding how to unlock cities' ability to communicate to their audience in a way that is friendly, personal. And that's why we say we're all about storytelling. And Civi Social's like, every community has a story. What's yours is kind of our tagline. And it really is, when I get into the training with, your code officers and your police officers, I have them do an exercise where I have everybody close their eyes and picture their kitchen when they were 8 years old. And I have them draw it in crayon. And I do that as the beginning of this exercise because I want to break down all of the preconceived notions around communication and get people to a core emotional connective place in their hearts and in their minds before we start actually showing them how to do the work. And storytelling is essential. What you got to think about with social media is people will fall in love with that code officer who's doing funny videos and explaining their daily work. But at the same time, they're also going to actually understand that code is very busy and has a ton of stuff on its plate that they need to execute against every single day. That constant consistency and that personal relationship is the sort of core key to unlocking the secret of creating positive social media. And when it works, like I was talking to a friend in a small city, and this city has a lot of trails, and they're very valuable to the residents. Residents love the trails. And so she was at a dinner party. I was telling her about my new venture, and she said, it's so interesting you say that, because one of the people was kind of an agitator and was like, the city's not doing anything. The trail, I was just on the trail and it's closed. And four people stood up and said, no, you're not watching them on Instagram. They're actually out there with chain. They're doing. Sally Sue is like a wizard with a chainsaw. She is cutting those things out. She is clearing those trails. How dare you challenge what this city is doing? Because we see it on social. And that's what I'm talking about, because now your residents, not the keyboard warriors, but your actual residents who are following it because it's entertaining, engaging, and they have created that relationship with their city workers. There's the people that are doing the work. All of a sudden, there's this magical defense that builds, and the residents come to the city's defense.
Yeah, there's that connection, right? And
100%.
yeah, and so what you're saying is that by getting the residents invested in what you're doing and making it informed, because here's what happens. A lot of times the social keyboard warrior stuff happens in a vacuum, right? And what I mean by that is that you have individuals who start spouting off on social media and making these wild accusations or claims, but there's no one really there on the other side to push back because they don't know what's going on. They don't know what the facts are. They don't want to weigh in because they just don't know what's going on. So the loudest mouth in the room gets the attention. What you're saying is if a city can use its social media platform to tell a story and to generate a genuine connection with its residents, then they are armed with the ability to push back on some of those narratives.
That's exactly correct. I mean, it is, you said it much more eloquently and in a much more concise way than I did. But it is that, turning the tides, because people genuinely want, I think, to be positive about the community that they live in. There is a natural affinity. We choose the place that we live. I chose my home in Fort Lauderdale. And I'll tell you, the inspiration for doing this, in addition to my desire to give back, came from the fact that I had a massive tree come down in my yard, like a 20-foot tree, 30-foot tree, in a windstorm, which we have here in Florida. And I was out there with my neighbors. We were staring at it. It was blocking the street. We live in a sort of small street. And I said, "I'm so sorry. I'm gonna call somebody. I'll figure out how to get rid of this." And they said, "No, just call the city." I said, "Really? Call the city?" And so I did. And there was a gang of chainsaw folks out from city of Fort Lauderdale. Within 2 hours, it was gone. They left the stump because it was on my property. 3 days later, it was bulk trash day, and I saw the guy with the crane that was picking up the stoves and the fridges, and I asked him. I said, "Would you mind trying to pull that stump out? Like, I got to get rid of it, but like, would you be inconvenienced?" He's like, no, it's our job. And sure enough, he grabbed the stump with the little clippers, and out it came, and he put it in the truck, and away it went. And I said, "Oh my God, cities are doing this work, unsung heroes, every single day. I am so grateful for this work, and no one is telling the story. This is an
Yeah.
amazing story, and no one is talking about it. Instead, they're focusing on people." And I like to say that in the comments on Facebook and Nextdoor, and really our program is about broadening social to include, in jurisdictions where it's allowed, TikTok, but YouTube is a hugely powerful platform. Instagram is a hugely powerful platform. Like, get on platforms that have become the most relevant. And those commenters on Facebook are looking for one of two things. They are either looking for attention or they're looking for information. If they're looking for information,
And I will interrupt you there and say, not only are they looking for two separate things, but 99% of the time, the people who are looking for attention, the people who are looking for information, are in mutually exclusive groups. Is that fair to say?
1,000%, 1,000%. And that attention has nothing to do with you satisfying their need. If you respond and give them attention by saying, "Oh, you think there's an issue with in the city I'm working with right now. There's a keyboard warrior, and his mission is people leaving their trash cans out past, once they've been picked up, and he wants code out there to sticker them with tickets. And why aren't they doing this and this and this and this?" I happen to, have looked at this guy's social, and before that it was pensions, and before that it was something else. Like, he is never going to be satisfied. He's doing this to get attention. And if you feed that attention, if you lean in and you start to give him, "Oh yes, we're on it and we're working on that," and blah blah blah, you're just perpetuating the problem. So I always recommend to city managers, have a policy, implement a policy. We do not comment on social media. If someone is seeking information, it is easy to DM them and say, "Hey, saw that you commented on our post looking for information about such and such. Here's a link to, or please contact, or et cetera, et cetera." Take the conversation offline. The other thing that you need to be aware of, because I think so many people, electeds are terrible. As a former elected, I am guilty of this, obsessing about the comments. The comments are
Oh
relevant.
my
Like,
God, we could spend a whole episode just on this topic, and I don't want to interrupt you on that because I want to come back to something that you just said a
no, go
second
ahead.
ago, right? So you were literally saying that you advocate and teach local governments that they should not engage whatsoever with any comments on posts on their social media.
100%. Yep.
So no, okay. So isn't there a little bit of a contradiction there then, Sam? If you're saying, hey, you need to tell a story, you need to build a connection with the folks and what have you, then aren't you naturally going to want to respond to some of the positive praises and posts that you get from the people who are happy with the stuff that you're putting out there that has that sort of personality and
Yeah.
flair and that fun? Are
Uh,
you sure you're not responding to those at all either?
Send them a DM. They'll appreciate it more.
Interesting.
Right. Look, the most important metric that I measure as an expert in this field is, comments used to be relatively important, but if you think about social, if you step back and actually look at how people engage with social over the last, let's say, since the advent of Instagram, it is the scroll, right? I am making the motion with my fingers as if I was
Yep.
swiping over my phone. What is the thing that the scroll doesn't have? You see a bubble, you see the heart bubble, you see the share bubble, and you see the little, comment bubble, but you have to take an additional action to
To see
actually
the
look at the comments, right?
right.
So the people who are taking that action are, yes, are there going to be some of your fans in there? And yes, do you need to engage with them? One of the things I say to cities after they've completed the training, as I said, one of the most important signals that you're looking for is new faces, people who've never engaged with the city. What are they saying? How are they responding? What is the sentiment? How do you engage with them? Like, ignore the usual suspects, but really focus on the people who are new. And my advice is, take the conversation offline. Really appreciate your comment on our post. If you want to, if you want to know more, or we're doing this event or whatnot, it's a much more personal, direct outreach. It takes exactly the same amount of time as responding to the post, and the person will feel like extra special that the city actually proactively singled them out to create a communication to validate their positive feelings, and that can create valuable connections that can last and actually, again, grow that deeper relationship between city and resident.
Well, okay, I'm with you on that, and I hear what you're saying, but what do you do when you got some wild card out there who's just putting out blatantly false lies? I mean, how can you just let that go unchecked, Sam? That you just gonna let people just put the falsehoods out there and all the criticism of the city manager, elected officials, we stuff that we know is blatantly untrue. I
Yep.
mean, it's crazy stuff that's I'm thinking back to some of the stories I've gone through in my small town where like just blatant outright lies. Like, who concocted this? Where did this come from? Like, it's a small town. Where did this start from? Can we get to ground zero in this? Because where did these lies start? And if you don't challenge those lies and push back on social media, which spreads like wildfire, especially in
Yep.
small towns,
Yep.
how do you protect or inoculate yourself from these damaging comments?
So it's a great question. And being that I ran Bleacher Report, I will tell you that in sports, it is just the same, right? Like, I'm a Bills fan. There are basically two tribes in all of social media for Bills fandom. There's the group that no matter what goes on, no matter what disasters our front office or coaches decide, and look, they're pretty good and I'm happy with them, but like, they make mistakes. It's all Bills by a billion. We're winning the next Super Bowl every year, and we've never won a Super Bowl. And it's painful because they're just so out to lunch, but they're such positive advocates and they want to be seen as being like boosters of the club. And that's great. And then you have the group who's like, no matter what the hell happens, it's all we're all going, it's,
It's all doomsday,
it's all
right?
do,
Yeah.
this is just like the 90s all over again. We're going to lose, and Josh Allen's going to be wasted, and the front office doesn't know anything. And and what that is noise. Neither of those groups are correct. The way I would answer your question is, if you see a consistent sort of commentor or theme, combat it with really clever storytelling and social media to say, like, this is the ridiculous statement. Like, take the comment, make it a statement, and say, like, these are the facts, but turn it into a story. Don't engage, because what you're doing in engaging in comments is you're creating this one-on-one, this
Back and
him versus
forth,
that,
right?
back and forth, and you can't win that battle. So, and by the way, my other advice is to city managers and to communications managers, you gotta be honest and open with the good and the bad. It can't just be a Pollyannish feed. Like, I'll tell you a story. I worked with the company that makes Nordic Track. I was their chief content officer and ran social media. We acquired a company with an influencer that had 10 plus million followers on Instagram, one of the greatest fitness influencers in the world, named Kayla Itzines. And Kayla came out to Utah, where the company was headquartered, to film a commercial for this treadmill that we were very excited about. It was great. It was a great product. She got on the treadmill, cameras start rolling, and she was like, here are the three things I love and the three things I don't like about this treadmill. And everybody in the room, including me, was like, wait, stop the camera. What are you talking about? What are you doing? What's happening here? And Kayla's like, you don't understand. If I don't tell people the truth, my credibility, my authenticity
You lose it.
will never be valued. And
Yeah.
so I have built my business, and she, built a 8-figure business in personal training, which is outrageous. She's like, I built my brand on authenticity. Even more so for local government, where transparency and authenticity is like the keys to the kingdom. So I'll give you an example. In San Clemente, where I was working, like, there's again, these trails seem to be very popular. Different city, but trails are big, and they've been having a lot of beach erosion. It's something that the city's got a lot of focus on, because one of the trails literally fell into the ocean. Like, it just, the bridge that connected this trail collapsed. And so when I was in the city, sort of before the engagement, I was asking residents, like, what's important to you? Like, what are you concerned about? And this kept coming up over and over. So when I talked to the city manager, he's like, oh man, they really won't want to know that bridge is going to take, because of the structural way that where that sits, and all of the city stuff that, I've long since forgotten, but have been pulled back into, like Don Corleone and Godfather 3, like every time you
Yeah.
think you get out. But I was like, tell them it's going to take a year and a half, and tell them why, and do that now. Like, as long as they're getting the information and it's being honestly shared, and, like, we could do it faster, but it might wash out again. Our plan is to do this. Like, just communicate, but tell the story of the bridge. And as it's being constructed, like, that's interesting. People are going to be naturally drawn to those updates. It's going to grow your socials, and it's going to grow your trust.
I'm kind of curious about something. I dabble a little bit in the internet marketing space, especially even more so now that I've on LinkedIn and got the podcast and what have you. And I have a newsletter that I've put on LinkedIn. It's hosted on LinkedIn, and for a variety of reasons. And I have not begun the process yet of deplatforming them from, say, the LinkedIn newsletter to my own sort of list. And they always say, the money's in the list, or the power's in the list, right? And I've grown increasingly disenchanted with social media over the years myself. I'm 47 years old. I've been in local government for a long time, or worked in politics in one form or another. And I've just sort of kind of really gotten dissatisfied with it in large part. Although I do love LinkedIn and I've adopted it. And I just think it's a great place for me, right? Have you seen any trends into deplatforming or going back to more traditional old school email communication or different types of non-social media communication? And the reason why I bring that up is because a moment ago you talked about going into the DMs and being personal with the messages to these residents. Are you instructing or advising your clients to then take that conversation to another level to get them on for another list or for other forms of communication? I'm just kind of curious if that's been part of your repertoire so far.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not part of what we teach specifically, but I think the question is valid. And the point is, you're using social media communication to establish a deeper relationship to people who want to be engaged with their local government. And so having that DM saying, hey, email me message me, here's my direct contact, or here's the department that you need to talk to. And creating that connection over time, taking that off social media and creating an IRL relationship with those folks is not dissimilar to sort of marketing tactics. I mean, marketers use social media as a way to lead gen, right? They're out there hawking their wares, and the idea is, and we were in the sports betting space, so like, DraftKings wants you to sign up, and that's their goal, so that their ambition is get them down the funnel.
Right.
I don't think that that's the primary goal here. The primary goal is to create that moment that I mentioned that my friend shared with me. People that are not engaged, they're never going to go to a council meeting. They're not necessarily interested. They do go vote. They do see themselves as civically minded, but probably higher up on the ballot, so to speak. But that they have a genuinely positive impression of the city because they're seeing the work. Like that's the most important and core reason to be really, really thoughtful and have a social media strategy that leans into that. Now, I think that one of the benefits, there are a couple benefits. This is one of them, like adding additional advocates and people that you can engage directly that can help, whether they're joining commissions or help boost the city in a tax measure or something like that. Like gathering people down funnel is a tertiary benefit, but I think the main benefit is really switching a overtly negative, keyboard warrior led, reflexive and responsive impression of government to a proactive, we want to turn the residents into those Pollyannas. We want to move them away from that sort of negative.
So if you could put a point on it, a fine point, or break it down, because I know you broadly talked about storytelling in terms of personifying or making government more personable or relatable and creating that connection. What is it, or what steps or strategies should cities be doing in order to facilitate or create that creation? Like, what is the mojo? What's the secret sauce in order to get people to connect with your community and your staff and your local government in such a personal way? Like, what
Yep.
can you maybe break it down in that context?
Yeah, I mean, it's complicated. This is why this is why I do the training. I can't do it in a few minutes. I certainly can do it over 8 days, but really, like you have to start to think about things like how social media is surfaced. There's 4.75 billion posts to social every single day, right? There are 33 million videos uploaded to TikTok every single day, YouTube, et cetera. Like it's just an overwhelming amount of content. And when you think about natural advantages that cities have, most of the platforms do look for geo targeting. So if you're specifically speaking to an audience that is your municipality, the platforms are algorithmically going to help you reach that audience. That's a natural advantage that cities have and that smaller businesses have that, broader marketers and broader communicators on social do not. Then you really have to understand how to lean into the algorithm. The algorithm is trained to pick up content that signals that audiences are engaging. That could be watch time, that could be shares, that could be likes, sometimes it's comments. But TikTok, YouTube, Instagram all operate slightly differently, but there is sort of common themes like trends. There are very easy places to look. Each of the platforms has their trending now pages and other places that you can go to seek trends. And this is why identifying those members on your staff that are socially literate, who are actually engaged with social, who probably know even better than the sort of spaces that you can go to research this. A city manager or someone our age isn't necessarily going to go, oh my gosh, this dance video is going to kick. Like that was not how I ran Bleacher Report. It just isn't, right? Like
Yeah, yeah.
I could take all the credit in the world for growing that platform as rapidly as I did. It had little to nothing to do with me. It was my secret power, and the thing that I pride myself on is I can identify people that have that natural intuition around social media storytelling and give them some training, give them something to say, okay, now lean into that. Because if they're making the content on trend, if they're like, oh my God, I just saw this amazing clip that everybody's sharing on TikTok right now, and here's the way we tell our code compliance story that we've been looking to sort of share because there's a keyboard warrior who's been on and on about the trash cans. we're going to use this fun, highly hyper trend piece of content, and we're going to shape it in a story that tells Code's trash can thing. And that has to happen organically and naturally. You just need to have the folks that are capable of doing it. And like the communications people and the city manager's job is to sync with those people on a weekly basis and say, these are the struggles, these are the things that we want to communicate, this is what we're thinking about, these are the stories that we want to talk about. And let that group, like a writer's room on a TV show, go to town and use their natural instincts to be able to convert that story into something spectacular.
So this leads into a question I've been dying to ask now for a few minutes, and because you've used a phrase, socially literate, competent, I think, or something like that as well. And this space that we're operating in, government, is very risk averse. And there's a duality there, or a contradiction there, because oftentimes in order to get the algorithmic love, you need to be a little edgy or out there and do something a little different. Otherwise, if it's just the same boring old stuff, nobody's going to pay attention. So how does a city manager, for example, feel comfortable relinquishing the reins, so to speak, and giving staff that ability or comfort to tell a story? Because telling a story, sometimes, the jokes don't always land, or the story doesn't always hit the way that you thought it was going to hit. And we also live in a very hypersensitive time where everyone wants to bitch and moan about something or complain
Yep.
about something, and cancel
Yep.
culture. And
Mm-hmm.
everyone's got to be outraged about something. I mean, how do you wrap or put guardrails around this process so that you don't have staff creating more problems than it's worth when it goes to being
Yep.
active on social media?
It's a great question. And I think that cities typically have communications departments or an individual who is tasked with sort of being the person who manages social media. And that those guardrails to me exist within the policy and that individual. Like the city manager has to have a degree of trust. And I'll tell you, and in the clients that I meet with, one of the first questions the city manager will ask me is like, at the end of this, can you tell me if if I've got the guy or gal? The good news is, in every instance, I've been very impressed with the person sitting on the other end of that. They're desperate for help. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. These communications people are overwhelmed. In many instances, they've got other duties. They're throwing events and doing marketing for small businesses and other things that are not communications related. So they don't really have the time to dedicate to social media. And by identifying people who are socially literate to literally come up with, film, and deliver them, a portfolio of content to choose from, that takes a lot of the pressure off and gives them the volume and the tools to tell that story. But they're the gatekeeper. They're going to look at the, overly excited code person who may have strayed into sort of, DEI or cancel culture territory and go, I love this video. It's funny as all hell, but it's not going to fly, and we're going to can it. Like, we're not going to post it. You all social media orgs, mine at BR, I had a small number of my 300 person team that was doing this work that actually had the keys to the platform, and they were trusted implicitly. Did that mean that at times we didn't make mistakes? Of course we did. We posted stuff that was, off the mark. And you know what? Social media is two things. It's ephemeral and impermanent, and also an apology or sort of like a, hey, we, again, being 100% authentic and 100% candid when you miss the mark is a part of the process. So that over indexing on safety or I'm trying to not use the word conservatism because it's always a political thing. I'm like that,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah.
being overly conservative about what you post and being worried about it is
Or just
something.
overly risk averse, right?
Risk averse is the right way to
Yeah.
say it. Yeah, right. Like, I think that first and foremost, the idea of stories and trends is that they are designed to be fun and silly and ridiculous. And the work that cities do is actually wonderful and marvelous. And it's just really highlighting that in a fun, entertaining way that gets people invested in the overall work of the community. And I don't see instances in the dozens and dozens of people I've trained and talked to where that fear comes into play. Once they understand its story, it's about telling story in a positive way and thinking through story types. they get excited, and the fear goes away because they're like, oh yeah, we can do that, and we can do that in a risk averse way. We already understand. Look, it's in the DNA of government. I don't think there's a city or a county anywhere in the world that's going to go make a horrible piece of social media content like I've done at Bleacher Report that I had to apologize for. Like, it just isn't in their DNA.
Right. And Sam, something we haven't really talked about explicitly in the context of this conversation, but is overwhelmingly important. And I'm not an expert on this, but I think you can maybe expand on this. Is that studies have shown that people retain information and knowledge much more through reading stories or hearing stories as opposed to a PowerPoint presentation, right, with bullet points of facts and numbers. I mean, it kind of maybe goes to the whole history of like, the Bible being written, or, cavemen sitting in caves with around fires and what have you. But can you speak to the importance or significance of using that storytelling, not only from a point of creating that connection, right, but also being able to get the information out there and have it be retained by the public?
Yeah, this point was made as I wrapped up my engagement in San Clemente, by their city manager when I sort of said, like, what was your experience? What did you learn? Like, what was the one key takeaway that you had from having me here for the better part of 2 weeks? And he said, I really like the fact that we need to return as a society to storytelling. We, as human beings, are naturally connected and naturally primed to be storytellers. And and he goes on to say, the advent of email and text messaging and the sort of prevalence of the easiness of people. Once we wrote letters, but now it's just there's so much ease in sending communications that it's become highly impersonal. And of course, you mentioned, there's a lot of cancel culture out there, a lot of negativity, a lot of guardrails that have created these parameters on information that have made them all so safe and also dull and boring. People love to connect with other people through story, and social media is that place for a vast majority of our population to make those connections. Yes, a lot of, unfortunately, keyboard warriors, and I think, not to rag on a platform, because I love my platforms and I used to run a platform, but like Nextdoor is literally, a cesspool. It's designed for people who are seeking information to just sort of vent and be negative. But how many comments on Nextdoor are you going to remember tomorrow?
Well,
Right?
it's interesting. 2 points. I don't want to lose track of this conversation, because earlier you talked about social media being ephemeral, and you said ephemeral and
Impermanent.
impermanent. Yes. So you talked about social media being ephemeral and impermanent. So obviously it's here today, gone tomorrow a lot. Like, I post a lot on LinkedIn, but after a week or so, it's lost into the ether, right? Unless you really want to go digging for it. There's something in the biology or construct or the DNA of social media in that ephemeral nature that gives it a whole different dynamic, right? And I think it's an interesting, and I'm not sure how to unpack this, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to communicate here, Sam, but in many ways we place way too much importance on a social media post, right? Like, it's not a treatise, it's not a thesis or something, you know what I mean? And in many ways, we don't appreciate and accept it for what it really is like a moment in time of
Mhm.
just sort of that touch point,
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
Yeah.
Look, I'll make one point here because I think something that I thought you were going to go in this direction and you went in a different direction, but I'm going to go in the direction I thought you were going to go, which is, if it's ephemeral, like, what's the value? What is the value to a community creating a bunch of ephemeral content that's here today, gone tomorrow? And this is something I think that government is uniquely situated to be successful in this medium, because yes, your post disappears. I do LinkedIn videos most every weekday. I have a little fun thing that I like to do to keep in touch with my media friends. But it's not necessarily any individual post. And this is, again, that difference between traditional media. Like, if you put something out there in a press release, it's designed for permanence. But the consistency, the feeling overall towards that account, towards that organization, is built over time, and that is done through consistency. The algorithm itself rewards consistency. It is relentless in promoting accounts that are consistent and have consistent engagement. And so, yes, the individual content is less impactful because we are inundated. One of my mentors, when I took over at Vimeo and was coming up with a strategy, he said, "You're not competing with just the new television show or the new movie in theaters this weekend. You're now competing with the entirety of film and television history and hundreds of thousands of hours of social media content that are loaded onto platforms like yours every single day. If you want to break out, you have to be special." In social, in really in life and communications, that there's very few opportunities. I mean, we had two massive events happen in recent days, the debate and then the attempted assassination. These things will be forgotten in a few weeks or months, like not in a, like we think these are permanent, like no one's going to remember. Yes,
Right.
thematically they will, but the impact of the import, the things that dominated the airwaves and those 24-hour nonstop news talking heads talking, it goes
Poof,
away
it's
and then
gone.
it's gone, right? Like
Yeah.
everything is ephemeral. So really what you're left with when you think about social is that overall consistency, delivering an overall positive impression and personal connection to the work that you're doing. And that is powerful. And the other thing, two things: A, more people get their news. And I mean, not like just like light news, but people in surveys have self-identified, and this line crossed in about 2022, where more people holistically get their news from social media than from any other source. And that includes digital sources, the .coms, your local newspaper.com, CNN or Fox News, MSNBC, what have you. Like the .coms used to be the dominant, and now social has eclipsed them. So people are actually getting information from social. The beauty of this for city managers and their teams is the gatekeepers are gone. You don't have to
Right.
convince that cantankerous asshole at the local news channel to cover your story or beg some journalism student who's working at the local paper to give you the time of day. And you know that he or she is just looking to gotcha because they want to make their career and they're making no money because journalism is a terribly unlucrative business right now. Like you are in control. You have the keys to the communications platform that more people get their news from than anywhere. Like
Absolutely.
that's why this is important.
Yeah, and I don't want to I don't want to turn this into a conversation about me or what I've been doing with my platform, but my platform on LinkedIn is a living testament to that. My ability to communicate and get information out in a way that is unfiltered, pun intended, without having to go through a gatekeeper. I'm able to communicate and share the story or the narrative that I want to get out there across a wide expanse, right? Nationally, with my network obviously is primarily focused on American city managers and public sector executives. And it's an amazingly powerful mechanism when you have that ability to communicate in mass in such a way, when you also built that connection, right? You talk about almost like the creature. It's almost like waking up with a cup of coffee. I'm not a coffee drinker, but I imagine it's almost like how you describe it. People have this, like, they have coffee with your feed, right? I have people who regularly write in and tell me that they check my feed every morning. I consistently post every day. Sometimes multiple times. I usually have a steady pattern or tempo. I very seldom miss because I learned early on that the algorithm rewards the consistency, like you said, and it punishes inconsistency. And so you get those touch points that come in.
But that's how I want to give you some props here. This is how I found you. Like LinkedIn clearly knows that city managers and local government is something I'm interested in because I'm posting more about that. So you were surfaced to me on LinkedIn, and I had never listened to your podcast. I didn't know who you were, but I looked at and I think I liked one of your posts. And then all of a sudden I start getting more of your posts. I'm like, this dude is super interesting. And then I found the podcast, and now I'm like, my morning coffee, and I do drink coffee, is you're on my feed every single morning. And I'm looking forward to it. Again, going back to what we were talking about, that like connection with a friend. I'm now invested in your journey with your new venture. And it's exciting to me. I like to learn more about it. I'm on a journey now. And that's the point, right?
Well, what's interesting about you bringing that up is you said my feed's interesting to you, right? And my feed is very niche. It's a very niche based feed, right? I have a very targeted audience, generally speaking, or content of that I'm going out to try to focus on. And obviously, there's old saying, there's riches in the niches and what have you. Do you think that cities would be better served to maybe focus more on niching down. This is an interesting that I'm just thinking about this on the fly, right? Because the
Mhm.
idea of is trying to build a relationship with your community. Do you think that cities and counties that are running their social media pages, is there a way for them to maybe drill down into there's riches in the niches? And I don't mean actually monetizing it from a dollar standpoint,
No.
obviously, but for monetizing it in terms of, hey, we're going to be known for this. And that's primarily what our focus is going to be
Yep.
on. Do you think there's merit as opposed to trying to hit every single thing that the city does, or you understand what I'm saying? Is
Yeah,
there value there?
this is a this is a really good point, an important one. So a number of the cities I've worked with have separate accounts for their PD and fire. This is an
Right.
example of going down to niche because there's a lot of people who are particularly interested in law enforcement or particularly inspired by, the work of firefighters and paramedics. At Bleacher Report, this is another non-government example, but I think it proves your point. Like, we had dozens of what we called verticals or channels. It wasn't just Bleacher Report, the social media behemoth that made up that 100 million, 108 million people that were coming to visit with us. It was BR Betting, BR Gridiron, BR Kicks, BR Football. Like, we had dozens of House of Highlights. And each one of those was specifically talking to a constituency, from people that were fans of sneaker culture to people who were NFL freaks like myself to basketball fans. We specifically sliced it and diced it to make it more relevant to the audience. Now, I do think that there's a couple things here that's interesting. First, as you identify your storytellers and you find those people that are going to be the face of social media, as I said, the code folks, that might blow up. You may have a feed that's like, oh, shoot, we need to create a new account that's just for the code team because,
Uh
like,
huh.
that's where it's all happening. But that's okay. That's like Bleacher Report. Like, we started as BR. We were a generic, full-throated sports business. And then we sort of, as niches appeared, we then created separate accounts to super serve that audience with content from those niches. Each city will be different. As I mentioned before, cities have a natural advantage because the platforms do actually seek to localize and to surface content that's specific to local area. And that's a benefit, that cities can tell a more holistic story because they're already regionally niched. The platforms have already done that.
I want to ask you this question, and I want to follow up with a question about identifying the different platforms or channels that you think are the most advantageous. Okay. We've all seen cities and companies and organizations that have these social media feeds where literally nothing is going on. It's tumbleweeds, it's a ghost town. I've talked about the ICMA.
Awful. Awful.
It's like they literally they put post after post and there's no engagement whatsoever. And there's just no desire to even mix it up or change it up or what. Let's just say you were an organization that has no engagement whatsoever. What you're doing is working. How do you get out of that rut? And what do you do? Like, how do you even begin the process of trying to stop the bleeding and try to actually get some sort of life
Yep.
back into your post so people can be engaged?
So I can tell you two things. First, this is a product, and this is why I tell cities all the time, do not waste money on marketing agencies. What you're seeing, I'm sure there's somebody being paid to do that work, that sort of bland posting, because marketers are really terrible at social media. They're like, we got to post consistently. It's got to be in this format. And it's just awful. Like, worse than that is like the, National Hot Dog Day followed by Pride Month, followed by Black History Month, followed by more, National Hot Dog Days or Cheerleader Day or whatever it is. It's always this, like, they take a calendar, they're like, oh, there's a national event. Let's put a
Guess we got to post about
you
this,
got
right?
to post
Yeah,
about
yeah,
it, and
yeah.
it's
It's so
obvious
lazy.
and lazy and performatory. Like, I literally did a post on my LinkedIn, which was like, "Happy Pride, except to the lazy marketers," and it was a whole thing. I went on a rant. I'll send it to you, but my point being, Mr. Beast, who I've, had the pleasure of meeting, and I've met his team and I've watched how they created content, but I'm obsessed about Jimmy and I've thought about him a lot. Jimmy tells it like it is himself. He's like, I started at zero. I was a little kid and I didn't know anything about YouTube, and I posted a video, it got no views, and I posted another video, it got one view. And social media is a self self-taught skill. There is no cheat code or keys to being good. It is really test and learn. So like you and like me on LinkedIn, our accounts have grown and our audiences have grown because we've been consistent, and we're also telling interesting stories. And by the way, I'm sure when you do something on LinkedIn that pops, like, my average engagement on LinkedIn is probably somewhere around 1,500, 2,000 people will engage, will sort of view or wash over my posts on any given day. But then sometimes I'll get a post that gets like 75 or
Yeah,
100,000,
yeah,
right?
it bounces. Yeah,
It bounces. Now, I've done 30, 40 posts that have gotten that consistent number because the algorithm's like, yep, he's consistent in his content and these people and yada, yada. But when I get that, what a smart social person, why did that happen? What was what are the keys? Like, was that something, was I touching on a topic? Was it topical? Was it trend based? Was it this? And let me try to replicate it. And usually you're not able to, but sometimes, and with talented, younger storytellers, they will find, oh, this is this, if I do this and this, and then if I do this and this and
yeah.
this.
They're constantly A/B
Yeah,
testing, right?
correct.
They're
So at Bleacher Report, like, I could tell you if we did these three things, I could guarantee 700,000 impressions. And that is what I sold advertisers on, because the kids that worked for me, that, mid 20s to mid 30s, that were actually doing the creation and programming work, had backwards engineered through hundreds and thousands of trial and errors to get to that place where they knew the keys and secret. But you cannot, each organization, each creator, each entity on social media will respond and react in different ways. And one thing I'd say is, and I tell my clients this, like, be prepared for a member of your staff to become a creator and potentially leave because they've got millions of followers and
yeah,
and millions of dollars following them. Like, it will happen, and that's okay. That's a success story, and they're going to love your city. And the fact that you facilitated that for their career is going to be a feather in your cap for ages and ages and ages. And they'll probably do posts to help continue to boost your social, because they appreciative. Like, but social media is self-taught. The question you're asking is, for accounts like that, you can keep doing the same thing. If you're a city or if you're an organization and that's what you do, and you expect, like, what is it? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Like,
right.
that's what doing social media wrong is. Really upending it and thinking about it in terms of story and empowering, because you need people and you need to make it a priority. And if you dedicate a small amount of a select number of your staff's time to really putting emphasis on telling this story, and it's not something like, I look at Greer, South Carolina as a great, not a client of mine, but a city I admire. Albany, Oregon is another city that just does spectacularly interesting and innovative social media. And like, they're doing this organically. They didn't hire somebody. They just got up and said, we're going to take the reins and we're going to do it ourselves. There just aren't enough examples in small and, quite frankly, even large scale cities. Most of them look like the ICMA and the way they the way they
Well,
do their social.
but here's the thing, right? So if you're listening to this podcast right now, if you're a city manager, or I have some elected officials, I'm sure I have some PIOs or whatnot. But literally, what Sam is saying and what I'm going to echo is that the bar is set pretty low in the public sector to really stand out and make a name for yourself when it comes to content, right? And building a platform. And I'm talking about not only at the city organization level with the city media pages or what have you, but even in individuals like such as myself. Like, it surprises me that I haven't seen, since I've been posting on LinkedIn over the last 2 years and had this podcast, that I haven't seen more people, for example, Johnny Public Works Director, who starts kind of replicating what I'm doing and building his or her own model, right, of a platform, or Sally, finance officer or CFO or what, what have you, and start talking about these things. Because I felt like if anyone who's been paying attention, and I grant not everyone wants to be out there in the public space like that. I get it. I mean, I didn't really want to, I never sought to really be an influencer or a thought leader at all. It just sort of happened organically. But I've created this template or this model on how to build a platform. And I got to tell you, folks, it's had tremendous opportunities and advantages. Now, obviously, there's some downsides, and it's been a grind. It's been a lot of work, but it's opened up unbelievable channels and opportunities for me by virtue of being out there and developing this platform. The most important of which is just having the ability to network and meet people and get new relationships. And that's been so fun. So you're talking about right now, like, here we are in 2024. And if you are a PIO, or if you're a city manager who wants a PIO to be a little bit more on the leading edge, I mean, it's fertile ground right here to basically go out and seize the day and make a name for yourself. Fair enough?
100%. Like it is, everybody on YouTube follows Jimmy. They are trying, and that's why when he does something, you have 4,000 other videos that are trying to do the same thing.
They want to try to copy the
They
formula.
want to copy the formula. And it's not, again, this is not difficult. It's not brain surgery. It's not something that you need to hire an expensive marketing firm to manage because they know social. Like, this is something that is natively within. The talent exists in these organizations, and you just need to unlock it and have and look, you mentioned risk, the risk aversion. You have to have faith and give them support. And I think it would be a great for a second segment of this podcast if you'd want to carry me
Yeah,
over,
yeah,
because
absolutely.
I know we're
No,
getting
we haven't. We still have a lot of ground we haven't covered
close
yet,
to time.
Sam. We haven't covered the keyboard warrior, the social media terrorist that rocked the world of elected officials, and I have some experience in that area. So I think we can carry this over into a part two. I really like to unpack, because one of the big complaints I get from folks who follow me is we need to start talking to elected officials and educating them on how real and substantive these keyboard warriors are in the social media criticism, because time and time again you have staffers who will spend hours, right, putting together a proposal or working on a project, and all of a sudden 5 people show up to a council meeting one day at the last minute and gum up the works because they're making all these crazy accusations or statements, and the governing body is afraid to move forward because they don't want to risk getting unelected at the next go around. And so I think we need to unpack that in the next episode.
Joe, I love that transition, and I'd love to put my elected official hat on. One of the things that we can talk about is the importance of the conversation that I take with me to elected officials. And it's great because as someone who sat in the seat, I have that instant credibility. Not only am my resume from media, but like I can connect with them on a one-on-one level and say, look, you have to support your city manager and your staff, and here's why, and here's the benefit to you. So happy to have that conversation in our next episode
Awesome.
if you'll
Yeah.
hold me over.
Yeah, but before we do that, though, I want to put a kind of a final point on this episode, because we've been talking about social media in the general context of local government and how it operates. I would like to give you an opportunity to maybe expand on the different platforms and the pros and cons. And I think obviously it depends on the size of your organization. I've been primarily in small organizations where literally the only activity has been essentially Facebook and maybe an email distribution list of some kind. Twitter, there's nothing going on for a small town in Twitter, generally speaking, or X now how it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally do not have any experience with TikTok or Instagram. My wife loves the gram. Oh my God, my wife loves the gram, and she wants me to love it so much too, but I refuse to download the app. And so I don't know how it works in other people. I'm going to embarrass my wife, but in our household, we have regular bedtime cuddle time where she wants to show me all the crazy stuff on her feed, or all the pandas and stuff that she really loves to see falling out of trees. I gotta go through and scroll through the gram with her. That's our little bit of bonding time. But what platforms are you seeing right now are resonating with local governments? And obviously there's a stratification when it comes to the age of your constituents. I
Yep.
mean, Facebook's now supposedly the old man's social media or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
Unpack that. You're the expert.
oh
So
yeah, for sure. Look, it's so fascinating. I dove into some deep demographics, and two things surprised me. I always assumed Facebook, from a general user perspective, had sort of fallen off the cliff on an age basis. The reality is that at this juncture, Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, those three platforms, are so ubiquitous, meaning the adoption of those platforms is so massive that they actually concentrate and look like standard demographics in America. It all sort of lives somewhere between 34 and 44 years old is peak user base.
okay.
And it's consistent. Yes, Facebook is slightly older. TikTok is definitely younger. TikTok's probably closer to, let's call it 28, is where it's sort of like, if you think about the mountain and 28 is the peak,
The
right?
peak. Yeah. Yeah.
Like if that's, call it maybe 41 on Facebook and 39 on Instagram and 29 on TikTok, 37 on YouTube. But you are talking to a large, very demographically spread group of people on all of those platforms. Now, to go back to the question that you asked specifically about what platforms do I think are worthy of attention.
Well, and let me put a little another extra point on that too, because the smaller the organization you go, the less time you have or resources to allocate towards a platform where you're not really getting anything back in return, right? Like
Correct.
that's kind of like the gist of where I was kind of going with that as
Yep.
well.
100%. Look, I mean, I think it's important for cities to be on Facebook and Nextdoor, if for no other reason as a listening device, right? Like I did say don't respond to comments. I don't mean you should ignore them. I think they're interesting to see sort of the sentiment overly dominated by a small group of people, but like that is a place where people are having conversation. And there are a lot of Facebook groups that are self-formed by constituents and communities. And like, so having that as I describe Facebook as a listening platform. As far as storytelling and creation, one of the nice things about Instagram is it's a Facebook product. So being able to cross post, and I don't normally recommend cross posting, but for small organizations, it's essential from a resource management perspective.
Right, right.
But Instagram is a hugely important platform. YouTube is a hugely important platform. Did you know that if you exclude all mobile phones, so mobile phones don't exist, laptops and computers don't exist, the only place that you can watch content is on television. If I said Netflix or YouTube is the number one platform on television, excluding those devices, would you think it would be Netflix or YouTube?
I would think it'd be Netflix, but you're going to tell me it's YouTube, right?
It's YouTube, and
YouTube's such a monster, huh?
it crossed. Those lines crossed again about 22, 23. I can't remember exactly where the data changed, but like
So YouTube penetration on just regular TV is that high now?
yes, it is. It is the number one platform on television, and that's not including all of its other consumption. Meaning, it is a critically important platform. And look, YouTube is a place where people go specifically for information. Like how many people go? Like when
It's
a
amazing. YouTube
right?
is oh my gosh, Sam. I'm 47 years old, and I told my kids, like, they tap into it. I go, man, do you guys realize how powerful YouTube is? And they go, yeah, Dad, I know. And the reason why I do know is because I have no no mechanical ability
Yes.
whatsoever, Sam.
Yep.
And my oldest boy, I remember he was got out of boot camp and he was in the Marine Corps for a couple of years, and I went to go visit him, and my son was telling me about how he had changed the alternator and stuff on the car and did some other stuff, and he didn't get that from me because I have a policy. It's just write the check. That's my wife says, just write the check, don't even touch it. And I have no clues. I wasn't raised with a father. I didn't get any training in that ability. And my son, and I go to my son. I go, his name's Blake. I'm like, Blake, how the hell did you do this? He goes, YouTube, Dad. I'm
Yeah.
like, are you kidding? I
Yeah.
go, yeah, YouTube. I'm like, YouTube is so amazing,
It
and it's
is.
just incredible.
It's crazy. So same thing. Like anytime a weird light goes on in my car, and now with cars, they're so mechanically impossible to understand what the hell's happening. Immediately go like, what is this light? And of course, there's like 15 YouTube mechanics that are going to tell me what's wrong and how to quickly. And it always like saves me a ton of money because I'm like, oh, that's nothing. That I don't need to take that into the dealership. It's just an error and blah blah blah. But like if you think about if people use YouTube to seek information, and YouTube again, part of the training that we do with the comms folks is to talk about YouTube tagging and how your information is surfaced by using the platform correctly, so that when people are looking for a topic, whether that's sand replenishment in San Clemente or trail repair, if you have content and have properly tagged it, people are going to find that content and they're going to find it on YouTube. And by the way, because Google or Meta owns Google and you or not Meta, I'm sorry, Alphabet owns Google and YouTube, the search algorithm is prompting you into YouTube. It's going
Right.
to
Yeah.
prioritize video content over traditional text content. So if you don't have a presence on YouTube, you're shooting yourself in the foot. And what I find with most cities is they're just using it as basically a dumping ground for Granicus. Like they just say, okay, city council meeting, we
Yeah.
record it in Granicus, we dump it onto YouTube, and that's it. And that's to me, I almost said criminal, but it's like it's negligent because this is a wonderful platform where people find information that you can tell the stories that you want to tell, and it's not that hard.
So if you had to rank them, and we'll round out this conversation with this in a little teaser for the next episode. how would you rank the social media platforms? And I assume there might be some caveats here and there depending on the organization size, but I assume Facebook's still number one. And it sounds like to me you're saying, is it Instagram or YouTube is number two, generally speaking?
Yeah,
Or
I would say, look, doing what I would say is you don't, and I spend very little time teaching about or giving information about Facebook because really that is not a storytelling platform. So what you're doing on Facebook is fine.
really,
Yep. What you're doing on
really? So I didn't real I don't. So you're actually de-emphasizing
Yep.
Facebook in your work.
Yes, I'm teaching them to reprioritize. So I would not spend time on Twitter. I would use Facebook and Nextdoor as primarily listening and posting information. So sort of, you know,
Like one-way forms of
yeah,
communication, essentially, right?
SOP, like standard operating procedure, continue to do what you're doing on Facebook, except because you'll be leaning into Instagram, which is, I'd say, the number one platform that I would recommend putting some emphasis on. That content is naturally going to be cross-posted into Facebook, and so that story element
Gotcha.
is happening already. So that's what I'm training on the Facebook side of things. Like use Instagram to help elevate your Facebook. I would say my second platform is TikTok, primarily because TikTok and look, in the state of Florida where I live, it's not a conversation. Like they banned it for local
Yeah.
governments. So if you're in a jurisdiction where you can't use TikTok, I'm sorry. TikTok is really outpacing Instagram as it comes to stories and trends, and is sort of
Is it still though, in light of the pushback with the legislation and so has it lost any steam at all? Because or you haven't noticed it?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I continue to monitor, but look, that's going to have to Washington is going to have to figure out what they need to do. That's right now. It's like two cars racing at each other, and someone's gonna call chicken. And I don't know the story, but look, my hope with TikTok veering into quasi politics is that we're able to spin off TikTok into a US company, the US version of TikTok, and can
Right.
remove it from its Chinese parent. I think it's necessary, and there are reasons. Look, I worked at a platform. I know how powerful the tools behind, like the Wizard of Oz behind the platform. I've seen it, so I get the concern. But I do think as a communications tool, TikTok is outpacing Instagram, is becoming more important than Instagram, and is something to keep in mind if you're in a jurisdiction that allows for TikTok. YouTube, I think, and the other thing that's nice about Insta and TikTok is if you're doing TikTok, you're doing Insta. Like you're going to basically use
Right.
both platforms to feed the same stories on each. It's just I would use TikTok stories because they're more potent and relevant in the social media currency than Instagram. But Instagram is an important platform, and YouTube. And what's nice about Instagram, TikTok, YouTube has launched YouTube Shorts, which is basically their competitive vertical to Instagram and TikTok. So you can, utilize content across all three effectively. But YouTube is a different animal, and I use different kinds of training. The good thing about YouTube is you don't have to post as frequently. Like once a week is fine, but don't post the council meeting. Like post something of value, build a library of critical information that's told in entertaining ways, and then use shorts as a way to boost your following and engagement around the information they're creating.
Well, Sam, that's some wonderful content, some great tips and information. I really appreciate it. I think you've really dropped some knowledge in this episode for city managers and their staff to implement immediately. We're going to segue into the next episode about how we can guide our governing bodies and what have you when it comes to the social media warfare that's out there, how it affects their day-to-day morale and how they approach things in governing body meetings when it comes to voting and policy and direction to staff. But before we do that, why don't we give you an opportunity here to tell the audience one more time how they can find you online, how they can look you up and check you out, and maybe look into you for some assistance in the future.
Absolutely. So the easiest way to reach out is go to the website, which is www.civisocial.com. That's CIVISOCIAL.com. My email is simple, sam@civisocial.com, and would love to speak to anyone who's interested in working with us.
Awesome. And I'll put that information in the show notes for those who are listening so they can get access to that. I'm Joe Turner. This is the City Manager Unfiltered podcast, a podcast for city managers and other public sector executives. It is the most influential local government podcast in America. We will continue our conversation in the next episode with Sam Toles as we discuss the impact of social media on our elected officials, and maybe he can impart some tips and knowledge on how we can guide our elected officials to handle the criticism that they receive and how to not maybe overreact. Is that a fair statement, Sam?
Oh, yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that.
And don't forget, folks, Sam is a former elected official, so he knows exactly what he's talking about. So catch you in part 2 next week.